Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are on the Kitab al-Bay', and the next chapter is about being lenient towards those who owe you a debt. Hudhayfa reports that the Prophet ﷺ said, تلقت الملائكة روح رجل ممن كان قبلكم فقالوا أعملت من الخير شيئا. The angels took the soul of a man who was before you, and they asked him, did you do any good? قال لا. قالوا تذكر. The man replied, no, I did not do any good. The angel said, remember, meaning try to remember. And then the man replied, قال كنت أداين الناس فآمروا فتياني أن ينظروا المعسر ويتجوزوا عن الموسر. قال الله عز وجل تجوزوا عنه. I used to lend people money, and I would send my boys out to collect the money, but I would tell them, as for the one who is insolvent, that is, he cannot pay the debt off, then give him respite to such a time that he can pay the debt. And as for the one who is solvent, that is to say, he has enough money to pay off the debt, then waive the debt from him, so that he does not need to pay the debt anymore. So he is foregoing his right. And to this Allah Jalla wa Ala replied, تَجَوَّزُوا عَنْ. Forego him, meaning to say, do not take him to account for his sins. So from this hadith, we find the great virtue in, first of all, giving respite to the one who is unable to pay the debt. In fact, this is wajib. Allah Jalla wa Ala orders us, وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. And if he is in straitened circumstances, so he's insolvent, then give him respite up until a time when he can pay back. But as for the one who is solvent, then even for him, showing leniency is virtuous. And it is a means for Allah Jalla wa Ala to show you leniency with regards to your sins. We find in Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, رحم الله امرأ سمحا إذا باع سمحا إذا اشترى سمحا إذا قضى سمحا إذا اقتضى. May Allah have mercy on the one who is lenient when he buys, lenient when he sells, lenient when he pays back the debt, and lenient when he demands the debt to be paid back to him. So leniency in all affairs is virtuous. As the Prophet made dua for such a person that Allah should have a rahmah on him. And furthermore, in this particular hadith in Sahih Muslim, we find that Allah Jalla wa Ala forgives his sins just like this person forgave others or overlooked their debt. Notice in the beginning of the hadith he says that he cannot remember doing any good. Well, the point is, if by good you mean absolutely every good, so that would include Iman, then this hadith would not make sense, because how does Allah Jalla wa Ala forgive the kafir? So we have to understand this hadith in the proper context, otherwise it will go against the complete fundamentals of the deen. And we would interpret this hadith to mean any good in terms of good to the people. Because if a kafir from this ummah did exactly as the man did in the hadith, Allah will not overlook him. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ. Allah does not forgive that shirk be made with him. Another hadith in the chapter from Abu Qatada radiallahu anhu. He was demanding a debt back from his debtor, and the debtor would evade him. And then Abu Qatada found him, demanding his debt back, and the debtor said, Inni mu'sir, I am insolvent. Abu Qatada asked him, Allah, do you swear by Allah that you are insolvent? And the man said, Allah, yes, I swear by Allah. To which Abu Qatada said, فَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَقُولُ مَنْ سَرَّهُ أَنْ يُنْجِيَهُ اللَّهُ من كرب يوم القيامة فلينفس عن معسر أو يضع عنه. Whoever will be happy that Allah will save him from the distresses of Yawm al-Qiyamah, then let him give a break to the one who is insolvent, or waive the debt off entirely. This hadith gives a choice, either tanfis or wada'. Tanfis would be not to demand your debt back, but that the right is still owed to you, if you are the creditor. As for the wada', it means just to remit the whole debt entirely. So we can have a combination. We can have your remitting the whole debt, but only after demanding it. And secondly, you could have not demanding your debt back, yet still not remitting the whole debt. So that the right still belongs to you, it's just that you're not demanding it. And then thirdly, we could have not demanding your debt back and remitting the whole debt. And this third option is the most virtuous. And then apart from that, we learn from this hadith what we learned from the previous hadith about the man who was before us, sending out his boys to collect the debt back. He would give invar to the mu'sir, his respite to the insolvent, and he would make tajawuz on the musir, that is to say, the one who is solvent, to let him off paying the debt. The next chapter, it is not permissible for the solvent to delay paying his debt back. And also you should accept the reference. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet ﷺ said, مَطْلُ الْغَنِيِّ ظُلْمٌ وَإِذَا أُتْبِعَ أَحَدُكُمْ عَلَى مَلِيءٍ فَلْيَتْبَعْ. The Prophet said the delay in the payment of the debt on the part of a rich person or a solvent person is injustice. And if one of you, being the creditor, is referred to a rich person, then he should accept this reference. So what this hadith talks about is the rich person who is able to pay off the debt, but he keeps telling his creditor, oh, come to me tomorrow, or perhaps next week, I'll give it later on, and so on. If the person is insolvent, then he does have the right to delay the payment. And like we said before, it is obligatory upon the creditor to grant this delay. The next part of the hadith says, when you are referred to a rich person, then you should accept that referral. So this is to say that if you are a creditor and somebody owes you £100, he is your debtor, of course. Your debtor tells you, I know a person who owes me £100, so why don't you take the £100 which I owe you from that person? This is called al-hawala, from hawl, which means to move from one place to another. So you're moving from your first debtor to another person who is your debtor's debtor. Most scholars say that to accept this referral is not obligatory, it is mustahab. The word used in the hadith is al-mali, which we translated to rich. But there is more detail than that. There are some conditions to be respected. Number one, that this person, the second person we're talking about, to whom you are going to, the debt must be firm in his liability. So it must be absolutely established that he has a debt. It must not be the case that the debt is not fully established, or perhaps it is about to be established. No, it must be fully established in his financial liability. A debt which is not fully established would be something like the mukataba contract, or perhaps an ijara contract, whose term has not been fulfilled yet. The second condition is that this man or person must have enough money to pay you back, so he must be financially well off and solvent to pay you back that debt. Thirdly, this person must be somebody you can bring to a court of law if he delays the payment. So for example, if that person is your father, it is not possible to bring your father to a court of law demanding a debt back from him, because you and your wealth belong to your father. Or perhaps it could be somebody in much authority whom it is not possible to bring to a court of law. So these are three conditions which must be observed. We may add a fourth condition, that he must be somebody who is truthful. So even if he is rich, and even if he is somebody you can bring to a court of law, he must, in addition to that, be truthful, somebody who's not going to deceive you. So when we talk about being mali, you have to be mali in three areas. Mali with your wealth, that is rich enough. Mali in his body, that is you can bring him to a court of law. And mali in his speech, such that he is truthful about what he says and not deceptive. So mali in three affairs. Let's move to the next chapter, about the prohibition of excess water in barren lands. From the statement of Jabir, he says the Prophet forbade selling excess water. This is pertaining to water, let's say from the ponds or the rivers or the wells and so on, because this is naturally occurring, it is from Allah Jalla wa'ala, and the people have equal share in this. Just like the firewood and just like the pasture, people are equal sharers in all of this, so you're not allowed to sell it, as this would be taking liberties. However, you are allowed to sell water which you have gathered yourself, bottled up, and taken it back to your dwelling place or back to your premises in order to sell. That is fine. So those people who sell, let's say, bottled mineral water, they are not committing a haram action. Rather, in public places, you take whatever water you want and you leave the rest for others. In another narration, the Prophet forbade dirab al-jamal, and this is to say, to lease out his male camel to someone else so that the male camel can copulate with his female camel. You're not allowed to charge for this service. Rather, if you have this male camel, or any male animal for that matter, so sheep or cows or whatever, you're not allowed to charge for having your male animal copulate with someone else's female. Rather, these are from the matters that must be done for free. In another wording, we find the Prophet said, لا يباع فضل الماء ليباع به القلب. excess water should not be sold in order to sell the herbage or the pasture. That means if you sell water, then the shepherds will be reluctant to come to this land because in order to graze their cattle, they need pasture and water. Now, if you're selling them the water, they will be discouraged from entering this land because they do not have the money to pay. What does that lead to? That leads to their not pasturing or grazing their animals on this land as well. This is why the Prophet said, لِيُبَاعَ بِهِ الْقَلَى, because this would lead to actually selling the herbage of the land. So selling the excess water leads to selling the herbage of the land, because you cannot be grazing your cattle without water, because there's no doubt you need both. So if a land does not have water, then nobody will be grazing their cattle on that land, even if there is herbage. So the lam here is not lam li-ta'lil. That is to say, do not sell water so in order to sell the pasture of the land. No, it means do not sell water because that would lead to actually selling the pasture as well, by default or by necessity. It is the lam lil-aqibah, as in, for example, in the Quran, فَالْتَقَطَهُ آلُ فِرْعَوْنَ لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ عَدُوًّا وَحَزَنًا. So the family of Fir'aun picked him up, meaning Musa alayhi salam, لِيَكُونَ لَهُمْ. This lam, if we say it is lam li ta'lil, it would translate, so they picked him up, so that in order he would become for them an enemy and sadness. But of course that would not make sense. Why would they want to pick up this child if they know he's going to become an enemy and a source of sadness for them? They would much rather kill the child. But no, rather we say the lam is lam lil aqibah. So it would translate, so the family of Fir'aun picked him up, which would lead to him becoming an enemy and a source of sadness for them. So the lam is denoting the outcome of this action. Let's move to the next chapter about the price of a dog and the mahar of a prostitute and a dawsa given to a diviner. From Ibn Mas'ud al-Ansari, he says the Prophet forbade the price of a dog and the mahar of a prostitute and a dawsa of a diviner. Now, with regards to the price of a dog, there is a narration in Sunan al-Nasa'i, which is worth pointing out here, which says that the Prophet forbade the price of a cat and a dog except the hunting dog. That is to say, he did not forbid the price of a hunting dog, so you are allowed to buy and sell hunting dogs. However, that hadith is weak, so that is worth knowing. And this hadith in Sahih Muslim is general, so it includes all types of dogs, be they hunting dogs or otherwise. It is permissible to keep a hunting dog, or a dog to guard the fields, or a sheep dog, but these dogs need to be obtained by way of a gift, not by way of trade. However, one may argue that in a particular scenario where one needs a hunting dog and another person has a hunting dog, however, he will not give it away for free, he wants money in return, then you could make a case that for such a person who needs a hunting dog is allowed to pay the money, and the sin will be upon the one who takes the price of the hunting dog, not the one who gives it. Otherwise, the asl is that a hunting dog needs to be given as a gift, because the price of dogs is forbidden. It's a bit like bribery. If you need your rights and somebody is depriving you of your rights and will only give you your rights if you pay him, so this will be bribery, then you can pay him and the sin will be upon him, not upon you. The Prophet talks about the mahr of the prostitute. The mahr is normally given to the wife as a payment for intimate relations with her. And so the Prophet makes this analogy, because you have intimate relations with this prostitute and you give her something in return. So this is a mahr, only it is the haram type of mahr. And thirdly, he mentions the dawsa given to a diviner. A diviner being a person who tells the future or claims to tell the future. And so if he's given a gift in return for his services, then this is haram. So a kahin is the one who claims to tell the future, and arraf, on the other hand, from arafa, which means to know, he is more general. He claims to tell the future, but also other affairs like maybe lost property. You've lost something and you want to know where it is, or perhaps something's been stolen. So people will go to the arraf to help them trace their property back. And both of these types of people use the shayateen for their services. But what if somebody uses the services of a kahin or a prostitute, and he's agreed to pay the particular money or the gift? Does this mean he must give the gift now? Well, the answer is no. He must not give the gift to the person whose services he has taken Rather, this amount of money goes to the Baytul Mal. It is mainly the case that the jinn would work for these people in return for kufr, because they are likely to be evildoers and kuffar. Though it is possible, but probably a lot more rare, that a jinn would work for a human because of a righteous intention, because the jinn, being a Muslim, loves the human Muslim for the sake of Allah. It may also be that the jinn works for the human because he simply is infatuated with that particular human, or is in passionate love with that human. But normally, a jinn working for you does involve some sort of kufr. Also in the chapter, from Rafi' ibn Khadij, that the Prophet ﷺ said, شَرُّ الْكَسْبِ مَهْرُ الْبَغِي وَثَمَنُ الْكَلْبِ وَكَسْبُ الْحَجَّامِ. He said the worst type of earning is the mahr of the prostitute, and the price of a dog, and the earning of a kappa. So the new item in this hadith would be the earning of a kappa. Now the first two we know are haram forms of payment, but this third form we have evidence that it is not haram, and that at best it would be makruh. We know it's not haram because in Sahih Muslim we have another narration from Ibn Abbas who says that the Prophet had himself cupped and he gave the kappa his wages. And he says that if the wages had been haram, then why would the Prophet give payment for the cupping? So the word shar in this hadith should not be translated into some sort of evil sin, but rather it is to say that this form of earning is not fitting. So it is not fitting to take earning for that sort of work. The Prophet said, خَيْرُ الصُّفُوفِ الرِّجَالِ أَوَّلُهَا وَالشَّرُّهَا آخِرُهَا. The best of the rows of the men are the first, and the worst of them are the last ones. وَخَيْرُ صُفُوفِ النِّسَاءِ آخِرُهَا وَشَرُّهَا أَوَّلُهَا. And the best rows of the women are the last ones, and the worst of them, the shar of them, is the first one. That does not mean to say it is haram for men to stand in the back row and for women to stand in the first row. So we understand from the hadith that the better type of earning would be, let's say, in trade and other jobs and careers which are more worthy to take money from rather than cupping. If we say that the earning for cupping is haram, then there will be nobody who will make the effort to do cupping. Why would they if there is nothing in it for them? Yet the Prophet did praise cupping. He said it is one of the best types of your treatment. In another wording, khabith is used to describe the earning of a prostitute, the price of a dog, and the earning of a kappa. But khabith here does not mean haram. It just means lowly and bad, as in وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ. And do not intend to give the worst type of your wealth in the zakah. Also in the chapter, Jabir ibn Abdullah was asked about the price of a dog and a cat, and he said that the Prophet rebuked this. Well, the price of a dog we know about, but in this narration, the price of a cat is also mentioned. Why would the price of a cat be forbidden? Well, cats are aplenty, so selling a cat would be like selling excess water, something which should be given for free and not sold. Most scholars say that if the cat has some benefit in keeping it, such as it may catch vermins in the house, and that's definitely a benefit, then it is permissible to buy and sell it, just like any other beneficial item. However, this narration does seem to be general, so we say that it is the better way not to sell the cat and rather to give it for free. Also, buying and selling things like lions and wolves is also not permissible. Lions are cats and wolves are dogs, or perhaps we should say dogs are wolves. Let's move to the next chapter about the command to kill dogs and then its abrogation, and also the prohibition of keeping a dog, except for the protection of land and the cattle. So the first narration from Ibn Umar, he says that the Prophet commanded that dogs be killed. And so he goes on to say that every time we found a dog, we would kill it. In another narration, Ibn Umar says the Prophet ordered killing of dogs except the hunting dog and the dog to protect the cattle, that is, to protect the sheep and other grazing animals. It was said to Ibn Umar, but Abu Huraira also says that the Prophet allowed the dogs to guard the fields. And Ibn Umar said, Abu Huraira has a field. And the reason why Abu Huraira said that the Prophet allowed dogs to guard the field is because Abu Huraira has a field, so he would remember that item of knowledge which pertains to him. It should be noted here, Abu Huraira is not simply saying that the Prophet allowed dogs to guard the field just because he has a field and he's trying to twist the text to suit his needs? No, absolutely not. Many Muslims of today would certainly do this, but someone like Abu Huraira would not dream of it. Rather, Abu Huraira remembers well that item of knowledge which pertains to his everyday needs. And that is, of course, just natural. So Ibn Umar is saying that look how Abu Huraira would remember that item of knowledge which pertains to his everyday needs. Also from Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says the Prophet ordered dogs to be killed, until so much so that a woman would come from the countryside with her dog and we would kill it. He says, then the Prophet forbade it. But he says, upon you is to kill the black dog with 2 spots on his eyes, because it is a shaitan. So here we have an example of the sunnah abrogating a sunnah. Firstly, all dogs are to be killed, and now dogs are not to be killed, but just the black dog with 2 dots on its eyes. Any jet black dog can take the ruling, though the 2 dots on the eyes are not a strict condition. The strict condition is a jet black dog. The Prophet says it is a shaitan, hence it is allowed to be killed. What does that mean? What does shaitan mean? Well, a shaitan from every single population is the marid, or the particularly recalcitrant and rebellious type. So we have shayateen from the jinn. We also have shayateen from the ins, from the humans, the recalcitrant, rebellious type of people who are particularly vehement against Allah Jalla wa Ala and His deen. As you would have noticed, not all kuffar are the same. There are some who are particularly rebellious. And so from the dogs also, this jet black dog. So that would not include something like a Rottweiler or a Doberman, because these are not plain black, as they have brown on them. Also from Abu Huraira, the Prophet ﷺ said, من اتخذ كلبا إلا كلب ماشية أو صيد أو زرع انتقص من أجره كل يوم قيراط. Whoever takes for himself a dog, except the dog to guard the grazing livestock, or a hunting dog, or a dog to guard his fields, then every day a qirat of his reward will be deducted. There are some other narrations which talk about 2 qirat being deducted every day. In any case, it proves that taking a dog is haram, except for those 3 mentioned. There is one type of dog not mentioned in these ahadith, and that is simply a guard dog. That is a family guard dog. Is such a dog allowed? Well, we say if you're living in a place in which there is genuine danger, then absolutely the need for such a guard dog could be greater than the need for the dogs mentioned in the hadith, as the dogs mentioned in the hadith bring about a benefit, whereas a guard dog would ward off a harm, and that is a far more worthy cause. Now, just because you're allowed to keep these dogs does not mean that you're allowed to buy or sell them. If it be the case that you are in need of such a dog, and no one will give it to you for free except for money, then you can argue that you're allowed to pay for such a dog, and the sin will be upon the one who takes the money. And then this would be similar to a case of bribery for the one who wants to demand his rights, but cannot do so except by paying. Another question that we need to ask is it permissible for those 3 types of dogs which you're allowed to keep, is it permissible to have a plain black dog? Because we know that from the narration the Prophet said that the al-aswadul bahim, the plain black dog, is a shaitan and is to be killed. Well, the answer is no, you're not allowed to keep a plain black dog even for these permissible reasons. Yes, the dog can be part black, such as a Rottweiler or a Doberman, that is fine, but not a plain black dog. There is the objection. But what if somebody does keep a plain black dog in order to, let's say, hunt an animal? Is it then permissible to eat from this hunted animal? There is a difference here, but the correct opinion is that it is not permissible to eat the game of a black dog. And we're talking about a plain black dog, as in making it halal we would be encouraging people to take this plain black dog. Okay, what if a person does not know that to keep a pet dog is haram because it decreases from your reward a qirat every day, and in some narrations 2 qirats, so qiratan. Is there any sin upon him? Well, the answer is obviously no. If he did not know the ruling, there cannot be any sin upon him. However, what if a person knows that it is impermissible to keep a pet dog, but he does not know the exact punishment? So he does not know that a qirat, or 2 qirats, according to some reports, will be deducted from his good deeds, or his ajr, every day. The question is, will the qirat be deducted from his good deeds if he does not know that this is the punishment, yet he does know that it is impermissible to keep this dog? The answer is yes, the qirat will be deducted, even if he does not know what the actual punishment is. So even if he does not know that the qirat will be deducted, as long as he knew the ruling, the hukum, which is that it is haram, that is enough to establish the punishment on him. So the rule is, the punishment is established upon you as long as you know the hukum, the ruling. It is not a condition that you should know what the actual punishment is. So note the difference. So if someone knows that committing zina is haram, but he does not know that the punishment is 100 flogs and being expelled from your land for a year, do we carry out this punishment on the zani? Or do we say no, because he did not know what the punishment is, therefore we will not apply the punishment on him? The answer is we apply the punishment on him. As long as he knew it was haram, that's it. So it is not a condition that you should know what the actual punishment is. There is another hadith about the janazah. Man shahida janazah hatta yusalla alayha falahu qirat. Wa in shahidaha hatta tudfana falahu qiratan. Whoever follows the janazah until he prays upon it, he has 1 qirat, and whoever stays until it is buried, then he has 2 qirat. And he was asked, what is the qirat? And the Prophet replied, مثل الجبلين العظيمين أصغرهما مثل أحد. 2 qirat will be like 2 great mountains. The smallest of them will be like the Mount Uhud. So if we take that hadith and look at this hadith in the light of the janazah hadith, we could say that the qirat spoken of in this hadith is like the mountain. And this would be a sensible interpretation of the word qirat. Let us move to the next chapter about the wages of a cupper. Anas ibn Malik was asked about the wages of a cupper. He said the Prophet would get himself cupped, and his cupper was Abu Taybah, and the Prophet paid him 2 sa' of food. And he talked to his family, and the people of his family, they decreased some tax which Abu Taybah owed them. And the Prophet said, إِنَّ أَفْضَلَ مَا تَدَاوَيْتُمْ بِهِ الْحِجَامَةِ أَوْ هُوَ مِنْ أَمْثَلِ دَوَائِكُمْ. The best of your medication or your treatment is the hijama. This narration needs to be looked at in the light of the other narration, which says that the sharrul kasb, the worst of earnings, mahrul baghi wa thamanul kalb wa kasbul hajjam, is the mahr given to prostitute and the price for a dog. That is, when somebody sells a dog, that money which he earns is the worst of earning, and also the earning of a cupper. Yet we find in this narration the Prophet is giving some wages to a cupper, 2 sa' of food, and also he had some of the taxes remitted from him. So it proves that the earning of a cupping is not haram. At best we can say it is discouraged, but we cannot say it is haram. The narration says he decreased some kharaj. Now what this is that Abu Taybah was a servant, and his masters told them to go and work. You will earn some money, you will give us a fixed share of that money, and whatever is over and above that share will belong to you. This was the deal. Now the Prophet told his masters to decrease the amount that Abu Taybah has to give to you. So in other words, Abu Taybah can now take a greater share. So this contract is called the al-mukharajah. Note that this mukharajah is done as a favor for the servant, because even that which is over and above what the servant pays the master, it still belongs to the master, because everything which the servant has and his possessions belong to the master. The Prophet said that hijama is the best of your treatments. The treatments are not acts of ibadah, so one should not think that getting cupped is an act of ibadah. Rather, it is an act of treatment which, if it will benefit you, then fine. Otherwise, it is not an act of ibadah. Treatments vary from time to time and place to place. So back then, hijama was the best of treatments. For other people and at other times, something else could be the best of treatments. Also in the chapter, the narration of Ibn Abbas, he mentions something very similar to the first narration. He says that a servant from the Banu Bayada cupped the Prophet, and the Prophet gave him his earning, and he spoke to his master, and the tax put upon the servant was reduced. Ibn Abbas says that if this earning was haram earning, then the Prophet would not have given the wages to the cupper. From the previous narration, we find that the Prophet gave 2 sa' of food as the wages. The haram earnings in Arabic is called suht, from the verb sahata, which means to completely uproot something, as in the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, فَيُسْحِتَكُمْ بِعَذَابٍ, that He will completely uproot you with a punishment. And it is so called because it is mashutul barakah. The blessing is completely uprooted from it. So this type of earning has no blessing. Let's move to the next chapter about selling khamr. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he reports, he says, I heard Allah's Messenger ﷺ addressing us in Al-Madinah. He said, O people, Allah has indicated to the prohibition of khamr, and He is probably going to make it haram. So anyone who has khamr, let him sell it off immediately and take benefit from it. He says, we waited for some time, and after that the Prophet said, إن الله تعالى حرم الخمر فمن أدركته هذه الآية وعنده منها شيء فلا يشرب ولا يبيع. Allah Ta'ala has made khamr haram, so whomsoever this ayah has reached, and he has anything of the khamr, then let him not drink it nor sell it. So he says that the people brought the khamr and poured it in the streets of Al-Madinah. First of all, what is khamr? It is any substance. So any substance, doesn't have to be a liquid. So any substance which will cloud your intellect by way of pleasure. So upon this then, anesthetics which the surgeons can give to their patients are not classified as al-khamr. We can straightforwardly take the lesson from this narration that drinking and selling khamr is haram. There were 4 stages in the prohibition of khamr. The first stage was an acknowledgement that it is permissible. In Surah Al-Nahl, وَمِن ثَمَرَاتِ النَّخِيلِ وَالْأَعْنَابِ تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْهُ سَكَرًا وَرِزْقًا حَسَنًا. And from the fruits of the date palm tree and the grapes, you take from it a sucker, which is an intoxicant and a goodly provision. Then the second stage is just a hint at its disapproval. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. They ask you about the khamr and gambling. Tell them that there is a great sin in them both, but there are also benefits. However, the sin outweighs the benefits. Then the third stage was a stronger disapproval. In Surah An-Nisa, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. O you who have Iman, do not approach the Salah whilst you are intoxicated. So you are forbidden now to drink khamr, however only during or near the Salah times, not in the absolute sense. And then fourthly came the absolute sense, where in Al-Ma'idah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. O mu'minun, the khamr and gambling and sacrificing at stone altars and seeking a decision by way of arrows is an impurity from the work of shaitan, so avoid all of it that you may be successful. So we find Allah Jalla wa Ala can hint at things. So this is from His description or from His sifa, that He does hint at things. However, it is not a sifa dhatiyah, it is a sifa fi'liyah. So He does it when He wills it. We take from the narration that anyone who had consumed khamr before the ayah of Ma'idah had been sent down, then there is no sin upon them. And even if he died in a state where khamr was in his belly, still there is no sin upon them. Is it permissible to sell khamr to a Jew or a Christian where it is halal in their deen? The answer is, even if it is halal in their deen, it is still haram for a Muslim to sell it to a Jew or a Christian, because the hadith is general. We may also take from this narration a vital point, which is that khamr is tahir, because if it had been najis, you would not be allowed to pour it in the streets of Al-Madinah. Imagine pouring buckets of urine in the streets of Al-Madinah. Of course this will not be allowed. It will make the clothing and the shoes of other people najis. The Prophet said in Sahih Muslim, اتقوا اللاعنين, be aware of those 2 things which curse, الذي يتخلى في طريق الناس أو في ظلهم, the one who defecates in the pathway of the people or in their shades, meaning the places of shade where people sit. Also in Surah Abi Dawud, اتقوا الملاعن الثلاثة, beware of 3 places of curse, البراز في الموارد وقارعة الطريق والظل, to defecate in the watering places of the people and in the pathways of the people where they walk and in the places of shade. So you are not allowed to put najasa on the pathway of the people. In another narration, a man offered a water skin to the Prophet which had khamr in it, and the Prophet asked him, do you know that this is haram? He said no. And another man whispered to this man who offered the water skin. The Prophet asked him, "What did you whisper?" And he said, "I told him to sell it." The Prophet said that the one who has forbidden it has also forbidden for the khamr to be sold. And so the contents of this water skin was spilled out. So anything which is haram in and of itself, it is also haram to sell. And we also find that it is haram to accept a gift if it is a haram item, regardless of whether you're going to disappoint the one giving you the gift. We find it is permissible to tell a secret to somebody else if you are in a group of gathering. What is haram is that if there are only 3 of you, for you to whisper into the ear of the other, because that will produce some negative or paranoid thoughts in the third person, because he'll think maybe they are speaking about me. Why else would he be whispering? We also find that khamr is tahir because it was allowed to be spilled out. Also, to support this point, is that the Prophet did not order the water skin to be cleaned, just as he did about the pots which were cooking donkey meat. He first ordered that they should be broken, and then when it was suggested that could they be cleaned, he ordered that you should clean them then. Also in the chapter, Aisha narrates that when the last ayat of Al-Baqarah were revealed, the Prophet went out and read them to the people, and he forbade them to trade in khamr. What she is referring to is when Allah says, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى. Allah has permitted trade and made riba haram. Now reading this, somebody might say, well then, selling khamr is not a riba, therefore it is halal to do so, which is why she mentioned that the Prophet specifically pointed out that it is haram to trade in khamr. So he's making an exception to the general rule. And so the Prophet does not delay in pointing out an important message. And we take that the one who knows must spread the knowledge, even if he is not asked for it. The next chapter is about the prohibition of selling khamr and dead meat and pig and idols. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says, the Prophet says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ حَرَّمَ بَيْءَ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْتَةِ وَالْخِنْزِيرِ وَالْأَصْنَامِ. That Allah and His Messenger make haram the selling of khamr and dead meat and pig and idols. فَقِيلَ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. It was said, O Messenger of Allah, أَرَأَيْتَ شُحُومَ الْمَيْتَةِ فَإِنَّهُ يُطْلَى بِهَا السُّفُنُ وَيُدْهَنُ بِهَا الْجُلُودُ وَيَسْتَصْبِحُ بِهَا النَّاسِ. Tell us about the fat of the dead meat, because ships are coated with it, and the skins of animals are oiled with it, and the people use them for lanterns. The Prophet said, La huwa haram. No, it is haram. And then he went on to say, قاتل الله اليهود إن الله عز وجل لما حرم عليهم شحومها أجملوه ثم باعوه فأكلوا ثمنه. May Allah curse the Yahud. When Allah made the fat of the dead animals haram for them, they melted the fat and then they sold it and consumed its price. In this narration, it talks about 4 items. From them is the maita, the dead meat. Now the dead meat we're talking about is the haram dead meat, as opposed to the halal dead meat, which is, say, the fish or the locusts. That sort of dead meat is halal and halal to be sold. As for the pig, this is clear-cut enough. You cannot get a halal pig. As Jabir points out, this narration is taking place in the Aam al-Fath, the year when Makkah was conquered. Let's take a look at these 4 types. The khamr will corrupt the intellect. As for the maita and the khinzir, this will corrupt the physical body. Also, you are what you eat. And the pig, the ulama say, is a shameless type of creature, does not have ghaira. And so people who eat pig also become shameless, because you tend to take the qualities of that thing which you eat. As for the asnam, the idols, then that will corrupt the deen. So it's worthy and fitting that these types of items should be haram, not just to use and consume, but also to sell. But then the Prophet was asked, what about the fat of the dead meat? It does have some valid uses. فَإِنَّهُ يُطْلَى بِهَا السُّفُنُ. The ships or the boats are coated with it. وَيُدْهَنُ بِهَا الْجُلُودُ. And the hides of the animals are varnished with it. وَيَسْتَصْبِحُ بِهَا النَّاسِ. And people use them for lanterns. So if they have these valid uses, then why should we not buy and sell them? The ships would be coated with it so that water does not seep through the wood. As for the hides, then they become soft and flexible and they will not become corrupted quite so quickly. Anyway, the Prophet said, La huwa haram. No, it is haram. Meaning to say, selling these items, even if they have these good and permissible uses, selling them is haram. Note here, somebody might understand the hadith to mean that using these items for coating the boats or varnishing the hides or using them for lanterns, these uses are haram. And this is not the case. Rather, these uses are perfectly permissible. It's selling the fat of the dead meat which is haram. Because this is what the topic of the hadith is about, selling these items. And the Prophet said, huwa haram, it is haram. He did not say they are haram, meaning all of these uses, they are haram. It is huwa haram. That is to say, the sale, which is singular. And then he went on to say, قاتل الله اليهود, may Allah destroy the Yahud, because of their hila, their strategy that they used to circumvent the prohibitions of Allah. لما حرم عليهم شحومها أجملوا, when Allah made haram the fat of the dead meat, they melted the fat and then they sold it and consumed its price. Why did they melt it? It's because so that they can say that we are not consuming the fat, rather we are consuming a liquid. And this is an example of hila. In fact, we have hiyal today as well. One such a hila is what the Prophet talked about, bay'ul 'ina. This would be, let us suppose the vendor sells a computer for £1,000 to be paid for after 1 year, say. Then what happens is that he buys back this computer for £800. That is less than what he sold it for. And then, when the year elapses, the purchaser owes the vendor £1,000. This is bay'ul 'ina, about which the Prophet warned that if you do not leave this off, then Allah will send down humiliation upon you and will not take it off you or remove it from you until you return back to your deen. What's happening in this hila is that essentially the vendor has given £800 for £1,000 to be taken back later. Of course, if you give £800 for £1,000, this would be straight out a riba. But he's using this little computer, whatever the merchandise might be, he's using that as a device to make it happen so that it does not resemble an outright riba. And actually what is yet worse than this is something which you find nowadays with the mortgage schemes, where the bank will buy the house, let's say for £100,000, and will sell it to the purchaser for £150,000, say, to be paid back later or in installments. Now clearly the bank is not purchasing this house in order to own it. The bank is not interested in owning any homes. Rather, it is interested in making a profit. That is to say, give away £100,000 and take back £150,000. That's how these commercial banks operate. And this house is simply a little scheme to make this riba happen, or to not make this riba resemble an outright riba. And then they try to fool the people by saying it is a murabaha scheme. It is not a murabaha scheme, it is a riba scheme with the title to fool people. Because with a murabaha, the vendor will purchase the item in order to own it. He will not purchase the item in order to sell it to somebody who wants that item. So he buys an item, let's say, for £1,000. And he does this in order to own the item. And then the purchaser comes, he wants this item. The vendor says, I bought it for £1,000. And I will sell it to you at a profit of 10%. So therefore I will sell it to you for £1,100. This is murabaha from ribh, meaning profit, because the vendor has profited from the purchaser. There is nothing wrong with this, because it cannot be said this is a hila for the vendor to give away £1,000 and take back 1,100. However, with these schemes, mortgage schemes called murabaha, it is a scheme outright. Give away 100,000 to take 150 in return, and the bank would bind the purchaser to purchase the house. If it was a true murabaha, the bank would not bind the purchaser from purchasing, because you see, if you bind the purchaser that he must purchase, then you're guaranteeing this profit for yourself, 100,000 for 150,000. And this is what will expose the scheme, because they're guaranteeing this riba for themselves. Also notice that if you bind the purchaser, then what you've done is essentially you've sold the house without actually owning it, which of course is impermissible. You cannot bind anyone to purchase something from you which you do not possess currently. In a murabaha, the purchaser does not have to buy the item from the vendor. This is a great big difference. Now, do you think that the bank will purchase a house for £100,000 knowing that the purchaser is not bound to purchase this house from them? Of course not. They would not take that risk. Why? It's because they do not want the house in the first place. They're not interested in that. They're interested in the increase in the money which they will receive. Well, that increase is riba. Riba means an increase. And the point we're making is that this scheme is yet worse than ina, which is yet worse than what the Yahud did with melting the fat of the dead meat and selling it and consuming the price. In fact, we'll go further and say that just an outright plain riba would be better than a hila on a riba, meaning to say making riba look halal by strategy and trickery. That is yet worse than an outright plain riba. Because the one who deals in riba and knows it is haram, there is every hope that one day he will stop and will make tawbah. As long as you appreciate that this is haram what you're doing. Perhaps your iman is not strong enough to prevent you from the haram, okay, fine. But there is every hope that in the future you will desist. However, with the hila, you believe what you're doing is right. With these shubuhat and specious arguments, there is very little or next to no hope that you will stop in the future. Why would you want to stop something you've convinced yourself is halal? And the reason why the Prophet mentions this hila of the Yahud is to prevent his ummah from falling into the same trap. Now, interestingly, in another narration in the chapter, Umar ibn al-Khattab was told that Samura had sold khamr. And Umar responded by saying, قَاتَلَ اللَّهُ Samura. May Allah destroy Samura. Does he not know that the Messenger said that Allah cursed the Yahud? When the fat was made haram, they melted it and sold it. So an interesting discussion here is that we ask the question, is Umar making a dua against Samura? قَاتَلَ اللَّهُ Samura. May Allah destroy Samura. Well, we say no. These types of expressions, such as the one Umar used, and there are others as well, as in ثَقَلَتْكَ أُمُّكَ, may your mother be bereaved of you, or تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ, may your hands become dusty, meaning you say through poverty. These are words which may seem harsh, and it may seem like one is making dua against someone else. However, the dua is not intended. Umar simply here is expressing his disapproval. We next move on to the Bab al-Riba, the chapter of al-Riba. In the language, al-Riba means a ziyada or an increase, as in the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ. And when we send down on the earth water, it moves and increases. Also we have the word ar-rabwa, which means a high place or a raised place. In the technical terminology, it is understood in two ways, either an increase, so that would be, let us say, 1 sa of wheat for 2 sa of wheat, or it could mean a delay in payment between two ribawi items. For example, a sa of dates for a sa of another type of dates to be paid 1 week later. That would also be riba, even if they are of equal measure. And it is worth pointing also that riba only applies to certain items, not to every single item. Let's take a few more additional points of benefit. In the hadith of the man letting his debtors off, an important wording is that this happened to the man from those who were before us. So this would show us that the sharia of those before us is the same as our sharia, unless we have evidence otherwise. Also, with the ruling on al-hawala, majority say it is mustahab. However, if one were to say that it is wajib, if the conditions are met, then this would be a good opinion, because after all, an order has been issued. Also note from the conditions is that the debts must be the same. So if it's pounds sterlings, then the second one must be pounds sterlings. If the first debtor owes you £10 and he refers you to the second debtor, but the second debt is, let's say, wheat, then this is not hawala, because then what you're doing is that essentially you're exchanging pounds sterling with wheat. That is not a repayment of debt, that is a trade. So what they say is that the two debts must be of the same type, either pounds sterlings or euros or wheat or whatever it may be, it must be the same. Okay, here's the question, do the two debts have to be due at the same time? Because this has been said that it is a condition. But the better opinion is that there's no evidence for this. If the first debt is due now, then the debtor can refer you to the second debtor whose debt is due in 2 months. And that there's no problem with this as long as the muhtal, the one being referred to, is okay with it. Okay, do the debts have to be of the same amount? So both debts being £10? In reality, this is going to be difficult, because it would take quite some coincidence for both of the debts to be of equal amount. So the better opinion is that they do not have to be the same amount. So for example, if someone owes you £10 and he cannot pay you right now, and he refers you to someone else who owes your debtor £8, suppose. So you go to him and take your £8. That means £2 are left to be paid to you. And so this will remain a debt on the first debtor. There appears to be nothing wrong with this scenario. As for this idea of killing the dogs, initially the Prophet did order this to happen, and this must have been because dogs were creating some sort of nuisance in Al-Madinah. But afterwards, he abrogated it, and what appears to be the case is that killing an all-black dog is still in effect. But killing other than that is impermissible. As for killing a rabid dog, then that is of course permissible because of the harms, just like any other dangerous animal. We may take from the narration of the khamr, when it was finally made absolutely haram, that the Prophet telling them you must not drink it nor sell it, and they poured it in the streets of Al-Madinah, we may take from that you're not allowed to turn it into vinegar. And we're talking about the Muslims here, because had that been permissible, that would have been the option to take, because then at least you would not be wasting this wealth. And vinegar being permissible in and of itself to consume is wealth. So it is far better than just pouring the khamr down the streets. So the only option we are left with khamr is that if you possess anything of khamr, is to literally simply pour it down the sink and not make any use of it whatsoever, not even giving it as a gift to someone else, because that is helping in sin and transgression. Note, however, that if the khamr by itself becomes a vinegar, so without any intention on the part of the Muslim, then that is permissible to be consumed. As for the kuffar, if they turn the khamr into khal, which is vinegar, then the Muslim is allowed to purchase khal or vinegar from the kuffar, no problem. As for sale of dead meat, then anything beneath the skin is najis for the dead animal and impermissible to be sold. As for anything above the skin, like horns and feathers and fur, then this is tahir and permissible to be sold. And the Quran makes mention of these matters, that in it there is a benefit for us. As for the skin, then when it is tanned, it becomes tahir and hence permissible to be sold. The difference is, does it include skins of only those animals which would ordinarily be halal to eat, or literally any skin? So does it include the skin of the pig, for example? The dominant opinion is that it does not. It only includes the skin of those animals which would ordinarily be halal to eat, such as a camel, or a cow, or a sheep, or a horse, and so on. Other scholars say that it includes all skin, so even a pig skin or a dog skin, if it is tanned, it becomes tahir, and henceforth allowed to be used and sold. But practically we would advise the listeners to keep on the safe side, and not to use pig skin. Let us pause here and take some review questions. So question number 1, what is al-hawala and what are the conditions? Make mention of 3. Question number 2, is the wages for the cuppa haram? Explain the answer. Question number 3, in how many stages was khamr made haram? Make mention of them from the Quran.